So I see we have another 35mm lens, and I just fail to understand what your and everybody else's obsession is with this incredibly boring focal length.
Look, if people are watching this video, they probably like 35 mils as a focal length. If you keep complaining about it, I'm just going to mute your mic every time.
You're going to mute my mic, but I've got important stuff to say. This is the red-headed stepchild.
The great thing about a 35mm is you get really similar subject separation to a 50mm, but you get to bring a little bit more of your environment into the picture.
Welcome back, Deep Review TV viewers. It is Chris Nichols here, and we're playing with another 35mm lens.
Woo!
Thank you, Jordan. This is the brand new Sigma 35mm 1.4 DG DN Art. This is taking over, though, from a very important lens, which I want to talk about. The original Sigma 35mm Art lens, despite being a 35mm lens, was actually really quite influential. I remember working at the camera store. Jordan and I were selling these lenses, and this was really one of the first third-party lenses where pros said, this thing's so amazing, I would take this over first-party lenses like the Nikons and the Canons. I mean, it was optically fantastic, but it was made for SLRs, and so now we have this lens which carries on that art tradition, but now in a dedicated mirrorless mount. Now you might be saying, whoa, hang on, Chris, we've already had the 35mm Art lens for mirrorless cameras, but that's only a half-truth, because basically they took their SLR designed lens and then just permanently put on an MC11 adapter so it would work for E-mount and L-mount cameras. But that's not quite the same thing as making a lens purpose-built for mirrorless. This lens is, and this is also for E-mount and L-mount. Now you know how much I love shooting 35mm lenses, so Jordan actually did me a big favor. He took this lens on a family vacation and took a lot of good family snaps and some fun stuff for the sample gallery, which means I just get to do the test today and not have to worry too much about other photos. That's a really nice weight off my shoulders. Okay, so I want you, let's see, Kate, come closer. Come closer to me. Good, yeah, now we gotta face that way. Yeah, back up a little bit this way. Yeah, stop, no. Yeah, good. I want to start off talking about handling on this lens by actually talking about the 85mm version, because when we played with that DG DN, the one made specifically for E-mount and L-mount, we were blown away by how that new mirrorless design shaved a ton of weight as size and bulk off of the original SLR formula. It was way smaller, basically half the weight of that lens. It was a huge change. So, you know, we expected a similar story when we're going to look at this new 35mm 1.4 DG DN. Opening the box, though, it's pretty much the same size. It's really about the same weight and feel in the hand as the original SLR formula. You're losing about 100 grams, 750 roughly, down to about 640. I wouldn't say it's a large lens by any stretch, but we do get some notable improvements here too over the old lens. So first off, the big one, we have an aperture ring on here. You can lock it into the auto setting if you want as well, and it does have a click option so you can turn that on and off. We have our autofocus manual focus switch as well, but we do now get a custom button on the side, and so these are all nice features to see on a premium lens. Also, a very rugged weather sealed body, so those are all big pluses. Now, to round things out, you do feel like you're getting a premium lens here. Everything is built very well. The manual focus is nice and smooth, 67mm filter threads, which are very easy to find, and the hood's a nice touch. It's actually got a rubberized grip around it. You know, you don't ever really see that on a plastic hood. Nice locking switch as well. So it's a high quality lens. So of course, shooting the 35mm DG DN in the sunlight a lot today. Flare is very well controlled, I'm happy to see that, but we are getting some ghosting. And you can see here in the under the bridge shot where that dark shadow really helps us see it, and there's quite a bit there. It's enough that we probably need another Ghostbusters movie, whatever sequel that would be. I don't know, what are we at, 5 or 6, Jordan? 10? 4. 4? I think it's more than 4. So let's talk about Loca on the 35mm DG DN. Remember, this is longitudinal chromatic aberration where the foreground and background start to show some funky colors, usually like a magenta green split. it's really hard to get rid of in post, and this lens does have a little bit of bokeh there. There's some situations where it doesn't show up too bad, but there's other situations where you might see it in real world terms of being, you know, a little bit distracting, and again, it's hard to get rid of. I mean, you definitely don't need to be high as a kite on Super Blend Cannabis to see the colors. They're there. Not the worst we've seen, pretty average, but it can creep up in your photos. Now, if you're into shooting video and you're anything like Jordan, where you actually really enjoy the 35mm focal length,
Great focal length,
whatever ridiculous reason, unfortunately this lens is kind of a catch-22. Bad news first, this lens has quite heavy breathing. This is unfortunate in two ways, because the Sony G-Master's only real weakness as a 35mm lens was heavy breathing. So this is kind of Sigma's opportunity to maybe provide an alternative. Unfortunately, this lens exhibits very similar characteristics in that regard. Okay, but here's a plus. It is kind of only a plus for video users, but this lens uses a stepping motor. What that does give you in video is very smooth transitions. As well as I've talked about, the manual focus ring on here is quite buttery smooth. So those are all positives. Oh, until you go back to the photography side, because unfortunately the stepping motor is quite slow, as you can see here. You know, for street photography, weddings and events, it is a little bit slower. And this is where actually that G-Master 35mm excels, because that does have a linear focusing motor, which drives its elements much quicker. But I have to take some more samples. You know, we're gonna come back to the computer, we're gonna look at bokeh, sharpness and stuff like that, but I guess that means I have to take more photos, and it's on a 35mm, so I'm gonna be...
Which is a great focal length that has been the choice of professionals for over 100 years, because it's just such a great versatile focal length.
Welcome back. We're here in front of my bamboo wall of Sharpness +3, and I've had a chance to look at some of the photos, so let's talk about the stuff we're missing. Now, first off, we didn't touch on Sunstars. I've had a look at them, actually quite well defined, quite nice. The only thing to keep in mind though is, again, this lens is haunted by ghosts when you shoot near sunlight. Just keep that in mind. Now, when it comes to sharpness, I was actually very impressed with this lens. You can see here, shooting in the center at 1.4, we're getting great detail. I mean, even to the corners, there's just a little bit of softness, but once you stop down to 2.8, it all holds together beautifully across the frame. Shooting here in the corner, specifically at 1.4, you can see it helps slightly. It's not a big deal. And again, once I stopped down to 2.8, I was basically getting nice sharpness across the whole frame. So overall, I think this lens is quite sharp wide open, and stopping it down only makes it even better. Now let's talk about bokeh on this lens. The first thing I do like is that bokeh is very round, even when you stop down the aperture, and it's very clean. You know, we didn't see any onion rings or anything like that. However, cat's eye is kind of an issue on this lens. You see it almost even to the center of the frames when shooting at 1.4. It gets a little better as you close down, but it's always a factor there. Now, this is in the eye of the beholder. I mean, you can see a shot here that Jordan took. You got bokeh through the trees in the background, and it can actually look quite dynamic. I mean, some people like this kind of look for portraits and stuff. However, I will say, you know, in this shot here where we're focused close and we then see it transition through to the background, it's busy, it's distracting for my personal taste. Some people find this dynamic. I prefer my bokeh to have a smoother transition and a little bit of a softer blend. So I will leave that up to you guys, but this is definitely a characteristic of this lens. So in conclusion, even though this lens does have some characteristics like ghosting and that cat's eye, you know, again, you might be able to work around those things. When it comes to L-mount, this is an interesting lens because you have other options from Sigma like the 35 F2 and the 35 1.2. Now, I know we haven't reviewed that lens, but I think I've done my fair share of 35mm this season, all right? I'm sure I'm gonna have to do 6 more in the future, we'll see. But you know, otherwise, I think this lens does give you a nice option for depth of field and still maintaining a budget. It's not badly priced, and overall, I do think it's a good lens optically. Now, when it comes to Sony E-mount, that is a different story because there you do have to compete with the Sony G-Master 35mm 1.4. You should check out our review for that lens, but really the conclusion is that was a near perfect lens. I mean, it was very sharp, no ghosting issues, and it does focus way faster than this lens with those linear motors. In fact, our only issues optically with the G-Master were cat's eye bokeh in the corners, which this lens exhibits even more so, and the fact that that Sony G-Master breathes a bit, but so does this lens. So if you're buying for Sony E-mount, this is significantly more affordable, but I do think because the G-Master is just that good, it might be worthwhile to save your pennies and push for that lens. Of course, we've got sample galleries on this lens, and the CL team have a sample gallery as well, so check those out, links below. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of DP Review TV and another 35mm lens review. We'll see you soon.